We have to take a bit of a walk here. Talking about crypto while running 9:30 pace. It's not the easiest thing. Hi guys, welcome to the first ever Craic Overflow podcast with your host, Blaine Malone. Today, I'm going to be talking to a good friend of mine, Hamdi Allam. Hamdi is a software engineer at OP Labs. He's a keen triathlete, and believe it or not, he's also a pilot on the side. Every time I talk to Hamdi, I always leave the conversation with some valuable insight or just feeling generally more positive about the crypto space. So I think that's important to share, and I hope you enjoy this episode. So let's get right into it. So I've already briefed Hamdi on the term, what's the crack? So Hamdi, what's the crack?
We've had a long winter in New York and we finally have the sun.
Yeah,
so enjoying the weather.
Are you ready for the half marathon this weekend?
Oh yeah. And I just signed up for the next Ironman, 70.3. And
You did this last year, right?
Yeah, in September. So I'm doing it upstate now. Training's going well, but that's coming up 2 months.
Are you looking to beat last year's time, or are you looking
Oh
to...
yeah, 100%. I got a flat tire in September, so
Oh,
I added
shit.
like 45 minutes. So I'm going for 5 hours, 45 to 6 hours. Yeah, it's a triathlon, so you got 3 sports in there. You got swimming, biking, and then running. For a 70.3, it's a 1-ish mile swim, 56-mile bike, and then a half marathon, so 13 miles.
So this half marathon this weekend, good preparation
Yeah,
for what is...
And then actually this half marathon will be my 1-year anniversary of running in general. So actually, remember I was asking you for your workout.
Yeah. I was like mansplaining to Hamdi about how to like run, and then he whips out like...
Well, it's not mansplaining. I didn't know how to run.
Hamdi actually had his 27th birthday, and on his 27th birthday he ran 27 miles. I was running like 5Ks. Next thing, Hamdi's whipping ultra marathons out the back.
All right, 1, 2, 3, go.
All right, Hamdi. So how did you get into the crypto space? I feel like everyone's always got a story or some reason they went full new financial system mode.
Yeah.
You got one.
Well, for me, it wasn't much of the tokens or financial aspect. When I was in college, I was mainly interested in studying like distributed systems, but I didn't want to go to grad school. And this was like 2017. I learned about Bitcoin and different crypto projects. It was like, this is an avenue to basically explore that without needing a graduate degree. So I came to it from that angle. I was in a college org called Blockchain at Berkeley. Did a lot of like protocol stuff, protocol research. Got into actually implementing an early L2 spec called Plasma. Did that for about 1.5 years, shipped that, and just stayed in the space since.
Plasma was pre-rollup centered roadmap, right?
Yeah. Basically a UTXO sidechain.
What happened there? Why did that not continue on? Why did the rollup centered roadmap take over?
I think for a few reasons. One easy one, asset transfers cover a wide variety of use cases, but that's not the only use case people want to do on sidechains. So actually having an execution environment was a blocker to scaling, and Plasma's shortcomings come from there. And then also like the 7th-day withdrawal window, which we still have with optimistic rollups, but I think those are the 2 big reasons.
At the minute, you're working at OP Labs, right?
Coming up on 2 years.
Coming on 2 years, congrats. How did you find out about OP Labs? And it sounds like it was the next logical progression for you.
Yeah. Well, so after actually implementing Plasma, again, my interest was like scaling and distributed systems. I actually worked at Twitter for like 4 years. Did crypto stuff there for like the last year. And then coming back, I knew at that point I wanted to come back into crypto. Yeah, X acquisition didn't go as well as I thought it would. And when I was kind of exploring the state of the world for the crypto space from the lens of working full time, it felt like coming like home in a sense. While I was pretty familiar with L2s, it's the most interesting to me. The roll-up centric roadmap made sense, and Optimism was a natural place. I had known a few people there from when I was doing Plasma stuff.
Awesome. What are you working on now, and what's the things in crypto that are getting you excited?
Yeah, so we should be shipping Interop this summer.
What is Interop, and like why does it matter to like the L2 scaling roadmap?
Well, at Optimism, we're trying to horizontally scale Ethereum through many chains. And these chains are interesting in silos, like Base and Unichain and Ink. But I think they become even more interesting when they can talk to each other. So the next evolution of this scaling strategy is actually making that happen.
So one of the pain points today without Interop is what?
Yeah, well, moving assets between chains. There's like interesting solutions with intents. But these are, I think, in my opinion, good short-term solutions because it requires idle capital. You can't do native message passing without trusting the settlement system. So I think basically trust minimization is really hard through third-party solutions.
It's actually kind of hard to talk and run.
Well, we're not running at our zone 2 pace.
Oh, we're not.
Well, we're running at like a 9:45. Now we're running at a 10. Also, this view is incredible.
View break, New York City. If you're a developer today and you're used to writing smart contracts for L1 or a single L2, what kind of things do you need to keep in mind when you start developing for chains that are interoperable? And talking about the OP stack here, but in the future, we will see more interoperability between L2s. So do you have any advice or tips for developers here?
Yeah, no, that's actually an amazing question. A lot of what we're focused on now is actually what are those points? And I think the biggest one is asynchrony. So, right, single chain environments are single threaded. So you don't really express any asynchrony in your contracts unless your contract, has like phases between different steps. But learning how to basically express that asynchrony at a contract level, I think we'll start to see Solidity evolve in this way, where we'll start to have like async await syntax. Think about like timeouts, success and failure modes. So it'll be a little bit of a hurdle to get through, but it's not nothing that we haven't gone through in like the Web 2 world with writing like multi-threaded code. Yeah, that asynchrony I think is the biggest part.
An example there might be you've got some tokens on Base and you want to do something on Unichain. Are you talking about the asynchronicity being message passing between these two chains?
Yeah, primarily that. I think with token transfers, it's less of a blocker just because you can transfer the tokens and then do the things you need to do. It's not really expressed in the contract. But an example of something that is expressed in contracts is, let's say with Uniswap v4, you wanted to do a Coinbase KYC verified pool. Without token transfers, you need to asynchronously access that state on Base, right? So before you can do the swap, you need to basically read that information and then act upon it, but that read itself is asynchronous.
Right.
So it is message passing, but at a different level than just like tokens.
So I want to switch gears here and talk more about how you see the next 2 to 3 years of Ethereum playing out. I know that the ecosystem has went into this quote unquote war mode. So they're trying to ship a lot faster, and you've got folks from Paradigm and different companies trying to really push the roadmap forward at the grassroots levels.
Yeah.
From your perspective, like, how do you see the next 2 to 5 years? Super hard question, but it's always good to get some predictions.
I mean, I'm laughing because I know I'm gonna get crucified for this.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
I think in the next 2 to 5 years, we'll see a lot more institutional capital come on chain, and just people taking like crypto as a means of payment and general financial infrastructure a lot more seriously. And I think, Ethereum going into wartime mode is all about like, how can we make sure Ethereum is a de facto and legitimate place to be that, which I think all the work that has been put into it the last like 10 years is valuable because Ethereum is built from first principles with the tooling, the way contracts are open source and audited, et cetera, et cetera. I think we'll just see the roll-up centric roadmap like play out. We'll have a lot of key roll-ups kind of come into fruition, achieve some level of product market fit. And, we do the things we need to do to ensure that your user experience is clear and easy for both the chain operators, the developers, and the institutions to safely transact on chain.
Your prediction is a lot more focused there, it seems, on institutional capital coming into the space and the software that's been built up until this point reaching some sort of compounding effect where it's taken a lot more seriously and people start to rely on the trust properties.
Yeah.
So with that being said, like, what do you see are the biggest struggles for Ethereum to reach that prediction, or like hurdles along the way?
There's definitely like a macro component with regulation and just people holding crypto. I think stables will be a big part of it because you're by proxy of holding a more stable asset and not something like Ethereum. But that sort of activity, I think with stables will naturally bleed into more non-stable assets. In terms of hurdles, it's a good question. Honestly, like, I'm pretty happy with how things are going this way. I think a lot of the pain points people are seeing now are just like people not being happy with like price. I think we're seeing a lot more activity on chain, more stables are being minted on chain. All things considered, I don't know, I think things are going well. I think we're just in a weird macro environment along with just like use cases for crypto that I don't think are necessarily what will propel us into the next evolution of decentralized finance, which is things like gambling. Right. But there's just a little bit of anxiety around like those are the easiest markets to attack at first, but I don't think are really the stickiest markets.
Yeah, it seems like stablecoins are, maybe for lack of a better term, acting as this Trojan horse that is really getting people in on-chain because the UX or the actual product is fundamentally better than what we have today, which you can't really say the same for a lot of crypto products.
Yeah.
Some of them are clunky and adding extra steps to existing products that honestly like just so happen to have a centralized database. So yeah, I can see how stablecoins are gonna, well, I personally think stablecoins are gonna be this sort of catalyst for people using these chains.
Definitely.
Well, how do you think about L2s in terms of like their specific use cases? Because, you know, we have the EVM in an L2, so it's general purpose execution, but we're starting to see more L2s that are sort of application specific. And this isn't to say like Unichain is application specific, but they are sort of coming at the angle of DeFi. Yeah. And then you've got other chains that are focused purely on stablecoins.
Yeah.
So like, how do you see this fitting into the larger picture of like what an L2 is? And yeah,
I mean, just first thing comes to mind, I think we'll actually not see so many general purpose L2s like Base and Inc, for example. There will be a few as like places that you can go experiment with, get support, maybe tap into distribution. But like what you highlighted, I think a lot of basically like companies are going to bring interesting IP on chain, whether that be an application or data. And as you horizontally scale, transactions might flow in between these different networks as that data and distribution is being accessed. And I gave one a little earlier around like a Unichain V4 pool accessing Coinbase's IP, which is their attestation data, to basically support verified pools, right? Base is getting transactions there, although the application is very local to Unichain, right? You can extrapolate that to different chains. Like Sonium is bringing a lot of interesting IP on chain. Inc is doing a lot of DeFi with their CBBTC product. So yeah, I think we'll start to see a lot more of that, just like data access, distribution access, and not just like, here's general purpose block space, please use it.
Right. I guess following on from that, my next question would be, who is meant to do the routing here, right? Because like, is every user expected to understand that, for example, Unichain is the best, the least amount of slippage for trades, or still feels like a pretty big UX consideration. Like, who's going to take on the responsibility of routing between the best chain and like making sure that this is somewhat abstracted from the user?
I think we'll see a lot more opinionated front end, like Web2-esque front ends, where Uniswap's front end might prefer pools that exist on Unichain versus their deployments elsewhere. And then kind of like how World has their World app that interacts with the World chain, and their app can navigate that complexity. So I think if it's not going to be like general purpose routing, it'll definitely vary from app to app. And like how in Web2, you might like use Twitter, and then Twitter might be leveraging different APIs in the backend to serve whatever content they want, and Twitter handles the complexity of managing that.
It sounds like moving the complexity away from the user, so the user doesn't have to decide what chain to transact on anymore. That's purely taken up by these companies, and it's somewhat akin to how we do it today in Web2, where we don't decide if we're routing to EU, West, and Amazon Web Services.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, Europe. That's totally up to the company.
Yeah, but the backbone of this system is incentivized, trustless, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. All right, so Hamdi's training has got the better of me, and we have to take a bit of a walk here. Talking about crypto while running 930 pace, it's not the easiest thing. So ultimately, Hamdi, when you're thinking about your career and you're thinking about being a software engineer, what keeps you here? What's stopping you from sort of taking a bit more of an easy job that's a little less sedentary and allows you to leave the desk a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm leaving the desk running and doing all this triathlon training, so I got that covered. But working in crypto feels like, at least I think it feels like what it must have felt like to work in the early 2000s on the internet. Like thinking about HTTP and just like good abstractions and seeing that into fruition, maybe being a little uncertain around, is this technology going to be used? So I think what keeps me here is like that feeling later on when, someone transacts, or, my kid's transacting. I'm like, oh yeah, that what all this stuff that's happening in the background, help build that.
Yeah, purposeful work, and
yeah,
down the road, you feel like it'll pay dividends. I guess
100%.
There's a question around, like you were saying, that you're able to avoid somewhat of like a sedentary lifestyle while you're a software engineer. Like I too, I'm a software engineer, and it's pretty hard, right? Like you wake up and you've already got messages on Slack or whatnot, and like what's your discipline around that? How do you continue to get your workouts in and still performing your job at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta get good sleep. That's the big one. That's the hardest one. Try to be as productive during the day. If you minimize the amount of time wasted, that's just more time to spend probably doing something else. Yeah, it's just trade-offs, you know?
I think I actually used to find it easier to sort of put my Slack aside and delay reading the messages. But I don't know, like it feels like as we're getting closer to ship and interop, it's just a little bit harder to switch off.
But it's a fallacy to think that after we ship this, time will free up. There's always going to be the next thing.
It's true.
You gotta just make time. And an easy, I guess, quote unquote challenge is if you think you don't have enough time, just look at your screen time. I would guarantee there's at least, 2 hours on TikTok
100%
or something that you can eat at.
Yeah, I do think it's an important topic though to talk about, because as far as I understand, a lot of people in software engineering are actually putting their health or even their interests second, right? And obviously I'm not living in fantasy land here. We have to earn some money and do all of these things. But I think any sort of advice or pointers around like how to continue to operate at the level you're operating at while also putting yourself a bit more in the center of these equations.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of laughing just because it makes me seem like I got everything figured out when it's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
I feel like we're incredibly lucky. Like, Optimism's remote, that helps. If we weren't doing things like running to your workplace, if possible, kind of tying like activities together that help reach your goals. But you just got to make it work.
David Goggins, if you want to come on the podcast.
I'm sure he has the answers.
I guess like one of the reasons why this format was important for me is honestly because I don't really sit at the desk anymore that I need to. All right, so it's 2025. Crypto has been around since 2009 at this point, 2008, the inception of it. What is your hot take?
The one I've been thinking about recently when it comes to Ethereum and all the negative emotions and all that. ETH is a great utility. It's also security to some lens because, the security of Ethereum depends on it.
Are we talking about security as in?
I mean, like an asset that you're meant to hold.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
It's a little bit of both, right? You have this world computer that you can leverage ETH as utility for. And I actually think the price of ETH to some extent doesn't matter, right? Like if we bring people on chain, the price of ETH is not in any way correlated to that activity. I mean, it is in a certain way with transaction fees, but like, ETH to 10K, ETH to 50K, like I think that's a lot of people looking at it from the securities point of view, which holds, right? Like I think as Ethereum becomes more of a critical dependency in like a lot of people's paths, institutions, governments, etc., by proxy of that importance, I think people will want to buy more ETH because you need the system itself to be secure. So in the long term, I think ETH is a great investment, but a lot of the discussion that takes away from the benefits of Ethereum because the price isn't 5-10xing right now. I think like in the short term, the next year, the price doesn't even matter. It just needs to be sufficiently high such that it can't be compromised.
To dig in on that last point there about like sufficiently high so that there's no issues. Like what do you mean there?
Yeah, so that a single party or a conglomerate of individuals can't buy enough ETH such that they can take majority consensus.
Right. Yeah. So the total value basically locked in staking has to be at somewhat of a unachievable threshold, such that like nation states or.
I think as more people use ETH, that threshold increases because you don't want compromise to happen. But I think the fact that ETH is at 2017 price levels doesn't even matter right now. Again, to some extent.
Yeah. So they're fundamentally kind of like, with that framing, there fundamentally has to be a floor to the price of ETH, right? Like the security of the chain, like if you've got 100 million USDC on ETH, if the total value of the amount of Ether staked in validators falls below 100 million ETH, suddenly there becomes an incentive to actually attack the chain.
Yeah, totally.
So in some roundabout way, there's a floor on the price of ETH, given it will incentivize larger institutions, if they have a lot at stake on the chain, to actually stake more of their ETH, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a hairy question. There's a bunch of caveats and edge cases, but generally you got to execute first principles, keep the values high, and we'll win. On
the market talk while we're here, do you see any big reasons as to why ETH potentially didn't perform as people thought it should have this cycle? Or what do you think the reasons are there for that? And I know that you said the price actually doesn't matter that much in the short term, but have you any sort of takes on there?
One of the easiest use cases of crypto is gambling and prediction markets and meme coins, and ETH isn't the best chain for that, right? So we've seen that activity kind of go elsewhere, which I think is fine. Yeah, ETH is a utility, so its utility hasn't been that high. And I do think like with the role essential roadmap, there's been some interesting questions around value extraction, which I don't agree with, but a lot of transaction fees have gone to L2s. So it's a mix of that plus like the predominant use cases right now with these speculative markets. So I think those are the two reasons I can think of.
ETH is kind of like morphed a little bit in recent years just to pushing execution off to L2s, right? And we kind of want to understand here, like, what the future use case for the base layer of Ethereum is. There's a lot of talk about, it's going to become a data availability layer. I want to just get your take on how that might look and like who's going to use this for data availability.
Yeah, also another loaded question. Probably get crucified for this.
The spicy takes are important.
There's a lot of people who think ETH should be more than just a DA layer, which I agree with. I think ETH has its place for that, and there will be native execution on chain. But I think ETH as a general purpose DA layer is also another great source of utility for ETH. If it turns out, validators on ETH aren't making enough money, you can just raise the DA fees, right? There should be a market for that, and it should be profitable for those securing Ethereum to make money off of it. But I think the most important thing is that I think alt DA is actually extractive to Ethereum, where all I have to do is run an Ethereum full node, and I also basically can recompute Arbitrum state, Optimism state, base state, et cetera, et cetera. We can't add critical dependencies to execution environments. So as long as these rollups, are rolled into Ethereum and there's no extra critical dependency and anyone can run a node and recompute basically the execution state of any other L2, I think that's an amazing feature.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what I've heard Vitalik talk about recently around on-chain configs and sort of having configurations per L2 on-chain such that it's actually quite obvious how to recompute the state and trust the L2's on-chain execution.
Stage 2 is important too, stage 1, all that stuff is important. But as long as Ethereum is always the critical dependency, where there's always an incentive to keep that dependency alive.
Right. All right, Hamdi, so thanks for coming along to the podcast.
Anytime.
You definitely got the heart rate up, and thanks for the spicy takes.
Anytime.